everyone, this is Sumita and today we are back with Latin adjectives. The word simian is taken from the word simos, which means ape. Corporal comes from the Latin word corpus, which means body. Sanguine comes from the word sanguis, which means blood. Puerile from the Latin word puer, which means boy. Cerebral comes from the word cerebrum, which means brain. Fraternal is derived from the word frater in Latin, which means brother. Onerous comes from the Latin word onus, which means burden. Feline comes from the word felis, which means cat. Civic is taken from the word civicus, which means city. Vaccine from the word vac, which means cow. Rural comes from the Latin word rus, which means country. Puerile comes from the word puerilis, which means child. The word puerile means childish. The word nebula comes from the word nebula, which means cloud. Atrocious is taken from the word atrox, which means cruelty. Canine is taken from the word canis, which means dog. The word filial comes from the word filis, which means daughter. Diurnal comes from the Latin word dies, which means day. Mortal comes from the word mors, which means death. Auricular is derived from the word auris in Latin, which means ear. Terrestrial comes from the word terra, meaning earth. Oriental comes from the word oriens, which means east. Oval from the word ovum, which means egg. Final comes from the Latin word finis, which means end. Ocular from oculus, which means eye. The word paternal comes from the word pater, which means father. Feminine is derived from femina, which means female. Carnal comes from the word carn, which means flesh. Gregarious comes from the word greg, which means flock. Timorous is taken from the word timere, which means fear. The word floral comes from the word flor, meaning flower. Pedestrian comes from the word pedester, which means one who walks on foot. The word igneous is taken from the word ignis, which means fire. Amicable comes from the word amicus, meaning friend. Vulpine from vulps, which means fox. Glacial is derived from the word glacius, which means frost. The word chivalrous is taken from the word chevalier, which means a gallant. Avarice comes from the word avarus, which means greed. Divine is taken from the word divus, which means godlike. Evangelical comes from the word evangelos, which means pertaining to gospel. Manual comes from the word manus, meaning hand. Audible from audire, meaning hearing. The word cordial comes from the word cord, which means heart. Equine from the Latin word equus, which means horse. Celestial comes from the word caelium, which means heaven or sky. Infernal is taken from the word infernus, which means hell. Domestic from domus, which means home or house. The word conjugal is derived from the word conjug, which means husband or spouse. Ferrous is taken from the word ferrum, which means iron. Regal or royal comes from the word reg, which means king. Generic is derived from genus, which means kind or race. Equestrian comes from the word equus, which means knight rider. Equestrian comes from the word equus, which means knight rider. The word legal is taken from the word leg in Latin, which means law. The word vital is taken from the word vita, which means life. Lucid comes from the word lucere, which means light or something that shines. Leonine comes from the word leo, which means lion. Labial is taken from the word labium, which means lip. Lunar is derived from luna, which means moon. The word masculine comes from the word masculus, which means male. Lacteal from lact, which means milk. Human is derived from homo, which means mankind. Oral from or, which means mouth. Nubital from the word nubere, which means marriage. Mental from the word ment, which means mind. The word nasal is derived from nasus, which means nose. The word bovine from bov, which means ox. The word local is taken from the word locus, which means plot. Local also comes from the word locus, which might mean a place. Punctual comes from the word punctu, which means a point. Impecunious is a word that is taken from pecunia. Pecunia means wealth. Im means lack of. So impecunious means lack of wealth, that is poverty. The word penal comes from the word poena, which means punishment. Radiant is derived from radier, which means ray. Radical comes from the word radic, which means root. Regular from regula, which means rule. Saline from sal, which means salt. Naval from navis, which means ship. Marine is taken from the word mare, which means sea. Ethereal is derived from ether, which means sky. Ovine from ovis, meaning ship. Vernal comes from the word ver, which means spring. Pastoral from the word pastor, meaning shepherd. Solar from sol, which means sun. Lateral from later, which means side. Filial comes from the word filius, which means son. The word visible is derived from the Latin word videre, which means sight. Fluvial comes from the word fluvius, which means stream. Cutaneous from cutis, meaning skin. Lingual is taken from the word lingua, which means tongue. Dental from dent, which means tooth. Arboreal from the word arbor, which means tree. Urban is taken from the word urb, which means town. The word crepuscular is taken from the word crepusculum, which means twilight. Rural is taken from the word rus, which means village. Conjugal again comes from the word conjug, which means spouse. It might mean husband or wife. The word bellicose is derived from bellium, which means war. The word rotary comes from the word rota, which is wheel. Voluntary is taken from voluntas, which means will. Aqueous or aquatic is taken from the word aqua, which means water. The word uterine is taken from the Latin word uterinus, which means womb. Feminine or effeminate is taken from femina, which means woman. Mundane is taken from the word mundus, meaning world. Occidental is taken from the Latin word occident, which means west. Sylvan is taken from the word silva, which means a wood. Verbal is taken from verbum, which means word. Annual is taken from the word annus, which means year. Juvenile comes from the word juvenis, which means youth. And with that, we come to the end of this video on Latin adjectives. If you find the video informative, please press the like and subscribe button and do share the video. Thank you.